And we find that on YouTube, is that correct?
Right, yep. Go to the Rotary Club of Flint YouTube channel, and there's several presentations already out there.
So you just go to Rotary Club.
Well, yeah, go to YouTube and then type in Rotary Club of Flint,
Got
and
it.
it should bring up that channel.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Hello, Reg.
Hi.
Hello.
Rich. Hi, Mark.
Hey, guys.
Hello, Reg.
Larry Nichols. How you doing? I haven't seen, oh, you're muted. I haven't seen you in a while. Oh, you're muted.
They don't
There
let
you
me
go.
out much, Ray.
Wait, oh, say it again.
I've been locked in my my little hideaway here.
Oh, okay.
I sneak down to the university under the cloak of darkness to pick up whatever mail comes in or whatever else.
That sounds good.
And I'm glad to hear that the session's going to be available on YouTube. I'm going to make it available to my students, some of whom I expect to show up today, but it's
Very good.
hit or miss. But I would like them to hear this. I think it's an important event in Flint, and I really appreciate the Rotary Club and the School of Management for continuing to put it on.
Very good. Okay. We're happy to make it available. Pamela, how are you today?
I'm doing great. And yourself?
Oh, just fine.
Good, good.
Hey, Ms. Hawkins, how are you?
I'm fine. Well, I haven't seen you in a while. I haven't seen a lot of people. And hi, Reg. And I haven't seen people in a while.
Hey, Jane.
Hi, Jane.
Morning, Bill.
Hello, all.
Jane.
Hi,
I want to
Jane.
know. I want to know how we're getting our cannolis.
In corrugated boxes.
Is that a dollar
Hi,
fine?
Al.
I can look at your
Rain
ring
was
doorbell
gonna
and
bring
see the
them.
one delivered.
Virtual cannolis are fat-free.
There's Richard. Hi, Richard.
Good afternoon, I think.
How you doing?
Oh, good morning.
Yeah. Hey, early.
Mike. We're at 42. 42 and climbing.
Oh, I have to behave now. We got one of my bosses is on the phone. I see Mike Tory.
Uh-oh.
Hey, Kyle.
Hey,
Hey, Kyle, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Kudos to you from Grand Blanc Township for all the work you did with the gas situation. The township supervisor said, I don't know who this Kyle guy is, but he did a great job. And I said, I think I can tell him that tomorrow.
Yeah. I was in touch with Scott Bennett quite a bit over the last couple of days, and the folks in Grand Blanc been very, very patient. We appreciate it. Those of you who don't know, we had a third-party excavator hit a 6-inch gas main and took out gas to about 1,300 of our customers in Grand Blanc Township. And the process of purging and repairing the main and then going door to door to get everyone relit and restored. And this weather certainly was a big deal, and a whole lot of people did a lot of work to make that happen. So,
Congratulations. Great work.
He thanked you profusely.
yep.
For you
Yep.
above and beyond. I don't know what you did, but apparently it was great.
Well, he
Well,
took some.
Scott's gas was out as well, so he made sure I was keeping him up to date on what was going on. So,
Okay. All right.
He just takes some gum, put it in the hole.
Yeah.
George, we're up to 54.
yeah, I'm steadily letting people in. So whenever you want to start, Ray, just let me know, and we'll.
Okay. So it's going to be, we can give it another minute or so, but I want to make sure that we give everybody enough time.
Yeah. Hello.
fine. Fine. Yeah. There's nothing in
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Here's a look. Yeah, that was a tink.
I could try it again if you want.
That's okay.
Oh.
This is not the one. Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. Today is Friday, December the 11th. This is a different screen that I'm looking at. But we're still certainly happy that we appreciate you joining us today and joining us to enjoy the program that we're going to present for you that was put together by the School of Management at the University of Michigan-Flint. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And for Rotarians, a four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth?
Is it fair to
fair to all
Fair to
concerned.
all concerned?
Will it build goodwill and better friendship?
Will it be beneficial to
To
all concerned? And thank you. And our inspirational message today will be given by the ever busy Kyle McCray.
James, how are you?
Thank you. Now, I'd ask if you're not speaking, if you could go on,
I'm sorry, your share account?
go on mute. Thank you, President Ray. For today's very special economic forecast and forum, I thought it was interesting to think about music and think about our economy. A study by the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra looked at 89 symphony orchestras around the country and examined the nearly 3,000 soloists that performed at the various concerts during a single performance year of these orchestras. Not surprisingly, piano and violin represented a majority of the solos. If you had cello, it was nearly 60% of the soloists performed on either the piano, violin, or the cello. But if you get down to the bottom of the survey, of the over almost 3,000 solos, only 16 were performed on the tuba or the trombone. Now, as someone who played trombone for 4 years, not all that well, I found that a little bit frustrating that the tuba and the trombone didn't get the love and didn't get those solos. If you think about an orchestra, the tuba and the trombone oftentimes are forgotten, but they're incredibly important because they provide the bass, they provide the momentum, and they keep everyone in the orchestra on beat. As we think about our economy, certainly the pianos and violins and cellos of our economy tend to also get the praise, the rewards, and the economic benefits mostly. But we also have a lot of tubas and trombones in our economy. We think about the people in logistics and shipping, in rail, in freight, who make sure that our goods and services get to us on time and on schedule. So think about the tubas and the trombones in our economy. And just like we would at the symphony, let's give them a standing ovation as well. Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you, Kyle. Where'd my screen go?
Are you
Can you
there,
put it
Ray?
back on, George?
Yeah, where are we at?
Well, I'm welcoming the speakers. Next. There we are. And now, please join me in welcoming the Dean of the School of Management at the University of Michigan-Flint, Dr. Scott Johnson. Dr. Johnson, you are front and center.
Okay.
Thank you so much, President Ray. And thank you, Kyle, for the inspirational message. Appreciate it. I'm pleased to see a great turnout for this annual event of our partnership and our economic forum with Flint Rotary Club and School of Management, University of Michigan, Flint. The university has adapted. I think this, there was a little conversation when we got going, adapted like many universities across the country to this remote learning situation we're in. We do miss the face-to-face with our students and colleagues, obviously, but the important point is that the educational process is continuing, just as we're continuing our economic forum tradition today. We continue to reach out to the Flint community through our programs. And I noticed Kathy Miller is on the video call here today. Kathy is one of our accounting professors, and she's planning to do the volunteer income tax service program again in conjunction with her personal income tax class. And that helps people filing their 2020 taxes, the residents of Flint. We're so proud to have our outstanding undergraduate and graduate programs that we offer to the people of the region and beyond. Finally, as a famous investor once said, the best investment is to invest in yourself. So with that, it's not too late to register for our winter 2021 semester. You can never be too old to keep learning, right? I now have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Jack Helmuth, who will introduce our speakers for today. Jack is a professor of finance at the School of Management, as I think you know, and he also served as dean of the School of Management at one time. Jack has been the prime mover in setting up the Economic Forum and has continued to organize the program each year. So thank you, Jack, for your dedication to this important event. So please help me welcome fellow Rotarian, Jack Helmuth.
He sent me a Zoom opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Scott. And yes, this is the 13th annual Economic Forum sponsored by the Rotary Club and the School of Management. Welcome Rotarians and the community at large, City of Flint. And also, I believe there should be some students in the audience from Grand Blanc High School, part of our scholars program, the School of Management. So I expect the quality of the questions at the end of today's presentation to be taken up a notch, maybe. But anyway, welcome Grand Blanc High School. Go Bobcats. I had to look that up on the internet, so.
Appreciate it, Jack.
Over the years, the panelists have really done an outstanding job introducing and providing insights into our economy. This past year, of course, has been particularly unpleasant, 2020. We're pleased to see that exiting and 2021 on the agenda. And the panelists will give us some hopefully some really great insight into what to look for in the forthcoming year. Now, what I'll do is give a brief description of each of our panelists. Dr. Christopher Douglas is Associate Professor of Economics and Chair of the Department of Economics. Our second panelist is Dr. Yenner Kendogan, Professor of International Business and Associate Dean of the School of Management, and also Faculty Associate, Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies at our branch campus in Ann Arbor. Come on, you usually laugh at that, but I'm not seeing any laughter here.
We're on mute.
Yeah.
Okay, and then finally, our third panelist is again Tom O'Rourke, CFA and Director and Senior Portfolio Manager, BlackRock Private Investors. And BlackRock, should you not be familiar with them, is perhaps one of the most prestigious investment firms in the country, if not in the world. I will ask Chris Douglas to go ahead and start off with his comments. We will go ahead and do what we do every year, which is have the panelists talk for 7 to 10 minutes in that range. After the panelists are done, Then we'll have Q&A. Of course, there won't be any cards going about, and rather than try to go ahead and have chat messages being sent to me, what I'll do is just recognize you on the screen, and we'll do Q&A that way. I realize that it's question and answer, so the question is followed by an answer, and we're not going to go in and get into discussions. Sometimes that's the Zooming thing kind of prompts that, but again, it'll be Q&A at the end of the presentation by our panelists. So Chris Douglas, if you would go ahead and start the analysis for us.
Okay, thank you, Jack. I'm going to share my screen here.
It was.
So you should see my opening slide. So thank you for the introduction. It's great to be back at the Economic Forum. This is my 13th time. I think I was at the very first one. It's something I look forward to every December, although I wish we could be together in person, of course, hopefully next year. Just before we get going, if I freeze up, please just bear with me. Zoom has been choppy for me throughout the shutdown. It seems to be cooperating today, so hopefully it cooperates for the next 10 minutes. So today I want to talk about the current state of the recovery. As you can imagine, it could be better than the economic outlook for 2021. So to say the very least, this is not the 2020 that we imagined. In a 2-week time period, the US goes from having record high employment and a 50-year low in the unemployment rate to the worst recession since the Great Depression. In February of this year, we had a record number of Americans working, about 155 million Americans working. The unemployment rate of February was under 4%. If you think back to your college economic days with the Phillips curve, economists thought that the unemployment rate couldn't get below 4% without inflation kicking in. But it was below 4% in February, and inflation wasn't on the horizon. So we go from arguably the strongest economy since the late 1990s to the worst recession since the Great Depression in a 2-week time period. The US economy has never turned on a dime like that in our history. The shutdown we saw in March throughout the spring and into June caused widespread, massive economic damage. And we'll feel the cost of that damage for years to come. And what's heartbreaking to me is that the good economy we experienced for the first 2 months of this year and in 2019 would have continued absent the shutdown. There's no reason to believe that the year of peace and prosperity that we enjoyed last year wouldn't have continued had the shutdowns not hit. I believe a second large-scale shutdown like we saw earlier this year would be absolutely catastrophic for the economy. The first shutdown had real costs, real damage. And if you lost your job, if you lost your business, you felt that cost, but the costs weren't felt by everyone because, for lack of a better term, fiscal and monetary policy papered over those costs for everyone else. I don't think, or I'm not optimistic that it could be done a second time. I view fiscal and monetary policy trends as unsustainable right now. To make the matters worse, the November jobs report we saw released last Friday was abysmal. 240,000 new jobs created in November. That's the kind of jobs report you would expect when the economy's good, not when it's digging out of the worst recession since the Great Depression. Absent for further shutdowns, I think in 2021, the economy muddles through until there's a vaccine. What I mean by that is, I think there'll be a recovery, but the recovery will plateau below pre-COVID levels because there are some industries out there that can't come back without full virus mitigation. Things like transportation, the airlines, restaurants, retail trade, arts and entertainment, and so forth. To be optimistic, I do think life will get back to normal after the vaccine is deployed, though I think there'll be permanent changes in the economy as a result of this recession, just like there have been for recessions before this one. This is not advancing for some reason. I might have to do it this way. I'll give it another shot. So for the first graph, I want to show is a graph of what's called actual gross domestic product versus its long-term trend. Sorry if I'm pausing. Since I'm the host of this meeting, I'm letting people who enter the waiting room. It's 2020 issues figuring out on the fly here. But gross domestic product, or GDP, is the value of all final goods and services produced in a year in the US economy. It's what people mean by economic activity. The blue line here is the long-term trend for GDP. Someone says they don't see the slides. Is anyone else seeing them?
I see him.
I'm seeing them.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah, let me know if there's a problem in the chat here. But the blue line is sometimes called potential GDP. It's what GDP would be if we don't have recessions. GDP would just increase at a nice smooth rate, thanks to increases in the labor force, the nation's capital stock, technology, and so forth. But unfortunately, we do have recessions. So the GDP we actually see, the red line, dips below potential. When there's a recession, then recovers back to potential GDP in the recovery. So the gray bars here are the recessions. So you can see 10 years ago with the Great Recession, GDP dips way below potential, then slowly recovers back to potential. This is what people call a Nike swoosh recovery, because it looks like a Nike swoosh, quick contraction, and then a slow recovery. So if we look at COVID-19, we have a quick contraction where in the second quarter of this year, GDP declines by 33%. That's Great Depression level bad. We haven't seen that rate of a decline since the Great Depression. We have the makings of a V-shaped recovery going on right now. So right now, GDP is about 3.5% below potential, which is an improvement. Don't get me wrong, but being 3.5% below potential is still really bad, because during the Great Recession 10 years ago, GDP was about 3.5% below potential. So basically what's happened is we've gone from the Great Depression this summer to the Great Recession right now, which is to say things are still pretty bad. And I expect this recovery to plateau at some point below potential until there's a vaccine. How far it plateaus below potential depends on how many more shutdowns we see before now, or between now and the vaccine. It won't let me advance slides for some reason, so I guess I'll just do this. So one trend I think is unsustainable is monetary policy. The money supply has increased by 55% in 2020. The M1 money supply, which is what this data is, consists of money, currency in circulation plus bank deposits. There's about $4 trillion in money in the economy before COVID. Right now, there's about $6.2 trillion in money in the economy, a 55% increase. I have to put a date down here when I collected the data because the money supply is increasing so rapidly that who knows, today it's probably even higher. So this is problematic because, as Milton Friedman pointed out, inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon, meaning an increase in the money supply should cause a proportional increase in the price level, meaning a 55% increase in the money supply should cause 55% inflation. It hasn't yet. I think that's because we've gotten lucky, and I think it's less likely we continue to get lucky the longer this goes on for. And if you want to make things a whole lot worse right now, just dump in some hefty double-digit inflation on top of everything going on. Now the slides are advancing good. So another thing that's unsustainable is the national debt increased by $3 trillion in 2020. Right now, the debt to GDP ratio is over 100%, meaning the national debt is greater than all the goods and services being produced in a given year. We haven't seen that since World War II. Lots of countries get themselves into trouble when the debt to GDP ratio gets that high. And you can see, looking back from the last two recessions, that every recession causes the trajectory of the national debt to increase. That happened in 2001. The national debt continues at a higher trajectory, and it happened after 2009. So you can see what the trajectory looks like right now. It's basically a vertical line. If this trajectory continues, in just a few years, the national debt is going to get pretty out of hand. Total employment in the United States, like I talked about before COVID, record number of people are working in February. COVID wipes out 20 million jobs in the course of a couple of weeks. It wipes out 10 years worth of job gains. Arguably, since the Great Recession wiped out all the job gains 10 years before that, COVID wiped out 20 years worth of job gains. About half of those jobs have been regained, although those gains are plateauing out, as you can see here. So right now there's 10 million fewer jobs compared to before COVID. At the rate that jobs were created in November, it wouldn't be until about 2024 that we regain all those jobs that have been lost. The civilian labor force is defined as the number of people working plus the number of people who are actively looking for a job. Before COVID, there's roughly 165 million people in the labor force, just a hair lower. The labor force contracts by about 10 million people thanks to COVID. What that means is people drop out of the labor force and stop looking for a job. Well, that's problematic because in order to be counted as unemployed, a worker has to be actively looking for a job. If a worker stops looking for a job, they're considered to not be in the labor force and thus no longer counted as unemployed.
No.
If the labor force hadn't decreased due to COVID and it was still about 165 million people, the unemployment rate right now would be about 10% rather than 6.7%. In November, the unemployment rate didn't tick down from 6.9% to 6.7%, but that's because about 400,000 people dropped out of the labor force in November, which you can see right here. The unemployment rate for the US, you can see 50-year low, and the unemployment rate overnight turns into the worst unemployment rate since the Great Depression. You can see there's been what looks like a V-shaped recovery in unemployment. I expect this to plateau out at a higher unemployment rate compared to pre-COVID. Although, as I mentioned in the previous slide, had people not exited the labor force, the unemployment rate would be right here, right now, about 10%. This is a graph of the number of people who file for unemployment benefits for the first time. This is released every week, so I updated my slide yesterday when the data was released. I put this graph in the presentation just so you can see how the labor market has deteriorated so quickly due to COVID. In early April, 7 million people filed for unemployment for the first time. That's more than 10 times the rate of unemployment filings we saw at the worst part of the Great Recession, where about 680,000 people were filing for unemployment for the first time. There's a V-shaped recovery here, although right now there's about 850,000 people filing for unemployment for the first time, which means right now we have more people filing for unemployment for the first time than at the worst part of the Great Recession 10 years ago. And you can't see it from the graph very easily, but the rate of unemployment filings ticked up this week compared to the week before, where the week before you had about 780,000 people filing for unemployment. That's not a good sign, to say the least. Total employment in Michigan, it's a different picture compared to the rest of the nation because in Michigan, before COVID hit, you didn't have a record number of people working because Michigan hadn't regained all the jobs lost during the last two recessions. Those jobs are slow in coming back, but in April, because of the shutdown, you have total employment in Michigan being lower than at any point on record. About 400,000 fewer people were working in April in Michigan compared to the worst part of the Great Recession. You can see some of those jobs have come back, but those gains are tapering off. So right now in Michigan, you have about total employment being around 2012 levels. So I mentioned earlier that there are a couple of industries that won't come back until there's full mitigation. The airlines are one of those. So this is the number of people flying every day as measured by people clearing checkpoints. You can see last year, there's about 2.5 million people flying every day. That was the case for January and February of this year as well. I was one of those people. And then in March, when the shutdowns hit, trips got canceled, mine included. So air travel falls from about 2.5 million people a day down to about 200,000 people per day. You can see there's been some recovery in air travel, but that recovery's tapered off. So right now you have about 750,000 people flying every day, about 40% of last year's levels. You can see the Thanksgiving bump right here, but even the Thanksgiving bump this year is far below what normal air travel was last year. Hotels are another industry unlikely to come back until there's full mitigation. So this is the occupancy rate for hotels for the last 10 years or so. You can see there's seasonal variation. People are more likely to stay in hotels in the summer compared to the winter. But 2020 was right on track with the historical trends. Until COVID hit, the occupancy rate falls to 25%. There's been a recovery, but that recovery has plateaued off at rates well below the historical averages. Well, this is a problem because airlines and hotels are fixed cost industries, right? The cost of the airline is getting the plane in the air, whether it's 100% full or 40% full. So losing passengers doesn't reduce the airline's costs, it just cuts into their profit. Same with the hotel. The cost of the hotel is really the cost of the building. Not renting out a room doesn't really save the hotel much in the way of costs. So any sort of loss of occupancy just cuts into the hotel's profit. So the question is, how long can industries like this hold on for at reduced occupancy rates, reduced utilization rates before they start to go bankrupt, before you start to see consolidation? I suspect not too much longer. So to conclude my remarks, I believe an economic shutdown should not be on the table like we saw earlier this year. I think it would be catastrophic. 2021 depends on how quickly there's a vaccine or how long we muddle through for. Even if there's a best case scenario, the vaccine is deployed, is quickly taken up, life gets back to normal, I think there are permanent changes in the economy due to changes of people's habits throughout the recession. For instance, perhaps people fly less once things get back to normal. Business meetings have been conducted on Zoom for the better part of a year. Why not continue and save on all that expensive business travel? If that happens, I think it would be catastrophic to the airlines. Business travel is something like 10% of flyers, but 70% of airline profits, because business travelers book expensive first class tickets and expensive last minute tickets. I think you'll see fewer brick and mortar stores. I think shopping malls are in real trouble as the trend of consumer shopping online has accelerated. And I think it's unlikely to go back to where it was. What about movie theaters, similar entertainment venues? Do consumers permanently prefer to stream content at home? I think there's a good chance they will. And I think a big question that doesn't get asked enough is, what about commercial real estate? What about big cities? How willing are people going to be to return to their 5-day-a-week commute through heavy traffic, to go to work in a big city where they've been working at home for the better part of a year and it seems to be going basically okay? How do big cities survive if people don't return to office buildings? Big city finances were in bad shape even before COVID, and I think they get permanently worse after COVID. If you own a skyscraper, or if you're a bank who loaned money to someone to buy a skyscraper, you've got to be concerned about what the future of the demand for commercial real estate in big cities is going to look like post-COVID. So those are some of the permanent changes I think we might see even after things get back to normal. So I've gone on longer for 7 or 10 minutes, so I will shut up now. I look forward to taking your questions and Q&A, and I will pass the mic over to Yenner. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Yenner, you're up.
Okay.
I need to find Yenner on the list. There he is. Okay, Yenner, you should be the host.
Thank you.
You saw another message.
All right. Can you all see my slide here?
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So as the flags in my background suggest, I'm going to be talking about the global economy, and unfortunately, I'm going to continue with the bad news this time, with the bad news that come from the beyond the U.S. borders. And the question that I will try to answer is how COVID-19 affected the global economy. Overall picture is like this. The global output took a big hit with sharp declines in gross domestic product and expected to grow slower than previously forecasted. For example, US GDP is expected to return to 2019 level in 2022, and that is year 2025 for Italy. The second largest economy in the world, China, reported a reduction of almost 7% in the growth rate for the first quarter. India's economy was expected to grow by more than 40% by 2024. Now it expects half of that. Overall, IMF reduced its growth rate predictions for the world by 6% and 3% for the advanced economies. Did globalization play any role in the spread of the disease? Globalization has certainly altered the way we live and make a living. International trade and cross-border investment increased international travel, and that is recognized as a significant determinant for the spread of the disease. Rise in urbanization, which also facilitates the integration of the world economy, further fueled the pandemic. As a result, globalization has emerged as an essential mechanism of the transmission of the disease. Based on this conclusions, several researchers developed a pandemic vulnerability index. As you can see, certain countries are more vulnerable than others. The top 10 highly vulnerable countries include Brazil, India, US, Russia, South Africa, Chile, Mexico, Iran, Peru, and Pakistan. In Africa, most vulnerable countries include South Africa and Egypt. In Europe, they are Russia, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. In Asia, they're India, Iran, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia. And for the Americas, they are Brazil, US, Chile, Mexico, and Peru. What about the impact of globalization, COVID-19 on globalization? World trade is projected to fall by 9.2% in 2020, its steepest drop in at least 60 years. That would be a painful drop, especially in the context of today's large integrated world economy. North America and Europe will be the hardest hit, and interestingly, Asian trade will be less impacted. Automotive products, travel goods, footwear, and clothing trade will drop the most, whereas computers and pharmaceutical trade are expected to grow relative to previous year. Even steeper declines are expected in cross-border investments. All types of investments, including foreign direct investment, mergers and acquisitions, and greenfield projects. Worldwide decline in FDI is expected to be around 50%. In comparison, FDI fell by 40% during the global financial crisis of last decade. FDI flows in emerging markets are expected to plunge by 16% to levels not seen since 2006, and by 75% in developed countries. Among all of these declines, the collapse of international travel, an estimated 70% drop in passengers, stands out. As you know, every country imposed restrictions on international travel. Nearly all countries partially or completely closed their borders to foreign visitors. Airlines are flying 90% fewer seats on international flights compared to 62% on domestic flights. Asia Pacific is the hardest hit region in terms of decline in travel, but other regions are not too far behind. This is rather important because tourism contributes more to global output than the automotive sector. And for global economy, business travel facilitates international trade and investment. Industries that depend on travel, like airlines, hotel, and tourism, will take a long time to get back on their feet and may never fully recover. International passenger air travel fell by levels not seen since 1970s. Large airlines such as Delta, Lufthansa, and Turkish each used to carry more than 5 million passengers per month. They are experiencing 30% reduction in stock prices now. Several others from Chile, Colombia, Australia, and Britain have filed for bankruptcy. This is about more than just air travel. Auto and auto insurance companies were also affected. Traffic at US land borders with Mexico and Canada fell in April to their lowest levels on record. New barriers have shut up the once open borders of the European Union, might prove far more difficult to take down. Cruise lines. The Carnival, one of the largest cruise lines company, used to carry more than 1 million passengers a year. They've observed about 60% reduction in stock price. Ports, the LA port used to observed a reduction in trade volume by 22%. Long Beach observed a 17% decrease, Shanghai port by 20%. Negatively affected industries such as manufacturing, accommodation, food services, and retail represent about 54% of employment worldwide and account for 30% of world GDP. Considerable amount of time and effort are needed for these sectors to recover. Tourism, hospitality, and hotels. Together with travel, tourism accounts for 10% of the global GDP. Tourism is immensely affected by this pandemic, and there have been already 14% decline in jobs related to this industry. Countries that are largely reliant on tourism, such as Thailand, Greece, are significantly affected. The pandemic has also affected the food and agriculture industry greatly. Developed countries are facing disruptions in production and supply chains due to the needs of machinery, disruptions in mobility, and delays in customs. Restaurants, hospitals, higher education, supply chain and logistics, trucking, sports, events are also among industries negatively affected. On the other side, delivery services, ventilators, personal protective equipment, face masks, sanitizers, paper products, and online retailers are among those that benefited. What is the way out? Simply stated, we need a coordinated fiscal stimuli without raising trade and investment barriers or devaluations. Since the financial crisis, the interest rates across the rich world has been near zero, with few brief exceptions. Parts of the emerging world has also edged closer to this low rate this year. In these circumstances, fiscal expansion is an effective way to boost growth, both within the stimulating country and beyond. For example, large trade deficits of the US partner reflect strong consumption supported by stimulus of goods produced at home and abroad. However, decisions about monetary easing have become more fraught. Part of the boost, especially at low rates, comes from currency depreciation, which helps exporters to get a larger share of trading with partners spending. In my presentations in previous years' economic forums, I made comparisons of currency devaluations and trade protectionism during the pre-World War II period. Then countries on the losing end put up tariff barriers, leading to escalating protectionism and engaging competitive currency devaluations. This ended up extending the Great Depression. Today, bold fiscal stimulus could spare the world this fate, but governments are already less free in spending than they were in spring. The recent trade wars were a delayed reaction to earlier economic grudges. Had the global expansion continued, they might have disappeared. Instead, the world finds itself once more bound by the harsh realities of depression economics. If they're not diffused by cooperation, we might find ourselves in debilitating economic conflicts of the pre-World War II period. What can the businesses do? What can they do to prepare for the time period after the pandemic? There are certain actions that can help. It shouldn't come as a surprise if as a result, we can see more consolidation on a global basis in certain industries, particularly in sectors hardest hit, such as tourism, hospitality, as well as airlines. Others can start with watching the global growth patterns, where the key lesson is that international flows tends to swing dramatically with macroeconomic cycles. In good times, they usually grow faster than GDP, and in bad times, they shrink faster too. Inability of manufacturing companies to secure parts from the shuttered factories in China caused a global mad dash to scoop up whatever substitutes could be found, often at whatever price. As factories reopen and supply chains stabilize, this experience is empowering the calls for bringing manufacturing jobs home, or at least to spread them more among mostly closer countries. This pressure will increase on companies to shift away from China, where the growing wages and land costs already move jobs to lower wage countries such as Vietnam and Indonesia. For companies targeting US markets, Mexico could see more jobs. Furthermore, when it comes to the healthcare sector, governments are trying to guarantee domestic supplies of critical products. As such, they may begin to treat them as strategic goods. The pressures of more dispersed supply chains combined with increased protectionism will have a fundamental impact on the global versus local decisions firms face. We would like to see a greater depression, not only of assets, but also decision-making in order to accommodate increased local demands. Instead of focusing solely on procurement costs, companies need to start considering stability, unlike my internet access, and resilience. Superpower frictions have already destabilized the international business environment before COVID-19, and the pandemic added new layers of complexity. It has led to a vast expansion of state power by introducing pandemic controls. In this environment, where companies come from or how well their home country governments get along will matter even more than before to decisions about where to raise capital, which markets to prioritize, and which supply bases to cultivate. Many have predicted that COVID-19 will hasten a fracturing the global economy along the regional lines with competing blocs centered on China, United States, and Europe. Most international flows have already taken place within regions. We should see more regionalized world as a result. Ongoing technological shifts such as the adoption of e-commerce, video conferencing, robots have all been supercharged by COVID-19. Before the pandemic, many focused on new technologies to reduce global flows, such as manufacturing jobs, returning at home done by robots instead of low-cost labor abroad. But many predicted that the pandemic-induced shifts could also strengthen globalization if not curbed by protectionist policies. Cross-border e-commerce expands export opportunities, especially for smaller companies. Forced experimentation with remote work, where successful, could spur more services offshoring. Public opinion about globalization may take another negative turn due to COVID-19. Economic stress could boost calls for trade protectionism. While robust public health strategies do not require ongoing barriers to globalization, nationalist politicians will blame the pandemic to fortify their opposition to globalization. The anti-globalization and anti-capitalist movements will further complicate the role businesses play in public debate about globalization. In conclusion, I think COVID-19 looks like a band, but won't break crisis for globalization. International flows are plummeting, but globalization and opposition to globalization will continue to present business opportunities and challenges. I look forward to hearing your questions after Tom O'Rourke's presentation.
Thank you, Yenner.
Stop this.
Okay, excellent presentation. And Tom, you're up next.
All right. So, there we go. Making the host. Share my screen here. Oops, let's do this. You able to see my screen there?
Yes.
All right, let me do this. Maybe make this bigger. Full screen. Excellent. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Before I get started, really just like to say a couple big thank yous. First of all, to Dr. Johnson, Dr. Helmuth, University of Michigan Flint School of Management, and then the Flint Rotary Club for creating this event, this forum, and then giving me the chance to speak or inviting me, I guess. I think over the years, this is the fourth or maybe fifth time that I've had the chance, or really a privilege, to speak at this event, and it is an honor to do so. I just wanted to say thank you. Now let's get started with some maybe some good news. I think as investors, we tend to be a little bit more optimistic, but
Professor,
there's good
we're not
news.
able to see your screen.
Oh, no, you're not able to see my screen?
I think there's several of us.
No.
Yeah, it's not available yet, Tom.
Is it available there?
No.
I can see it.
Let's do this. Oh.
So the share screen, and then there's one more button to hit once you share that. Pull up your PowerPoint, share screen, pull up your PowerPoints, and then I think you hit share or something.
Yeah, this is interesting.
You need to select what you're sharing on your screen before we can start.
Should be my desktop.
There now.
Why it's not sharing my desktop? It's very interesting. Not good. Files. This is crazy.
Okay. Take another minute, Tom, and then we'll find a backup. We have a backup of your slides.
That's interesting. I'm doing share screen. It says what to share.
I can see Tom.
Share is not working for some reason.
Is anything, you be able to see anything there?
No, not yet.
Man, that's crazy. It's on my screen. Share screen. I don't know why this is.
Can
doing-
can his PowerPoint be sent to
Yeah,
George?
I have it. I'll see if I can bring that up. Let me see if I can bring it up. Can you see that?
Yes.
Got it.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you about that. Yeah, I guess we go.
Just let me know when you want to advance the slide.
Yeah, I guess we got to go back to the beginning. There we go. There we go. Yeah. sorry about that. It's going to be a little bit awkward, but so yeah, I was talking about the good news, and the good news is, I believe that we've got just 20 days left of 2020, which is thank goodness. I can't wait to see 2020 go goodbye. It's been a difficult, volatile, challenging, if not heartbreaking year. So glad to see 2020 going to be behind us here shortly. Looking forward to 2021, and then from BlackRock's perspective, from where we sit, we think 2021 is going to be a year of significant economic acceleration. And we'll talk about why, and a significant economic growth. And also, Dr. Douglas and Dr. Kendogan talked about this, but obviously COVID-19 and the pandemic caused profound shifts in societies and then economies in general. And go to the next slide. And this is going to create a new investment order. And then go to the next slide. Really, there's three themes that are supporting this new investment order, and we'll go through them a little bit. The new nominal, globalization rewired, and then turbocharged transformations. You guys need to go to, keep scrolling ahead to, I think it's going to be scroll ahead. Let's skip a bunch of these slides. Skip ahead. There we go. The new nominal. So what do we mean here? This is a significant event that's going to occur in 2021. And what we're talking about with nominal, it's nominal interest rates. And what we believe is nominal interest rates are not going to go up much in 2021, but inflation very well might. So historically, there's a direct link. When inflation goes up, interest rates go up. That linkage is going to be broke next year, and the Federal Reserve has told us that. They're going to let the economy run white hot if need be. They're going to let inflation run white hot. Now, to Dr. Douglas's point, hopefully that doesn't get out of control, but we're in a situation where we're going to get very negative real rates of interest. And we're in negative rates of interest today. So what do we mean by that? If we take the 10-year Treasury, call it the nominal rate of 1% today, it's a little less than that, but we'll say 1%, 1.5% inflation. So if you take the nominal rate of 1 minus the 1.5% inflation, it gives you a negative 0.5% real rate of interest. That is highly stimulative. It's also sort of very, very positive for risk assets. So for BlackRock, as we look into 2021, we believe equities will do really, really well. And then in the credit space, in the bond market, high yield bonds would do exceptionally well. Next slide. I'm going to go ahead. Next slide. Yep, here we go. So why are we going to have such strong, we believe, strong economic growth? When you look at the amount of stimulus that's been put into the system, so looking at the US, the two bars there on the far left-hand side of the chart, we show fiscal support in 2020, and then what we think will happen in 2021, as well as monetary support. When you add those two together, we're approximating 28% of GDP in terms of fiscal and monetary support. This is just literally off the charts, stimulative. And we had a very unique situation happen this year. There was the vice chair of the Fed gave a speech a couple of weeks back, and he noted that for the first time in his professional career during a downturn or during a recession, that disposable income actually went up. And obviously, we believe we're going to get some more fiscal stimulus. Probably could use it before the end of the year, but Washington is a pretty dysfunctional place at the moment. But clearly we think in 2021, there'll be some more additional stimulus, and the Federal Reserve is going to keep interest rates basically pegged where they are. They said they're not going to raise rates till 2023. Not sure how they can say that, but they did. So basically we're looking at a triple powered or kind of a three-legged stool of tremendous support. So more fiscal support, tremendously accommodative support from the Federal Reserve. And then as Dr. Douglas and Dr. Kendogan have talked about, also the vaccine. So hopefully it'll get approved today or over the weekend or Monday, and hopefully they can roll that out. That is a significant game changer as well. So those three factors are hugely important in sort of catapulting U.S. growth. Next slide. Next slide. Right there. So when we look at, for the U.S., again, because of the turbocharged transformations that we're going to talk about here in a minute, the two favorite sectors for us are technology and healthcare. So here it just shows our sort of stock market, our equity market, the percent of that information technology comprises of our market, as well as healthcare. Between the two, it's about 41%. You can see relative to emerging markets, Japan or Europe, much more of our equity market is in information technology and healthcare. And because of all the COVID-19 pandemic changes that have just been turbocharged, we think those two sectors are literally the best place to be, and the U.S. has the highest percentage in those two sectors. Next page. And then we talked about, we liked high yield. So again, what we're showing here is two charts, or two line graphs of the spread of high yield bonds and then investment grade bonds. And we'll focus on the high yield bond, which is the yellow there. Earlier this year, when the recession hit, we had this massive recession, high yield spreads widened out to about 12%. So what does that mean? So it means if the treasury rates were, call it 2%, you got an additional 12% buying a high yield bond. So you could have bought a high yield bond yielding roughly 14% in the spring. Now those yields have come way back down. Today the spread is about 4.2%. So at the treasury rate of 1%, a spread of 4.2% gets you about a 5.2% yield on a high yield, lower rated fixed income security. Today, we still think that is attractive. It's one of the few asset classes in fixed income that you can still earn a somewhat acceptable yield. Next page. There we go. Globalization rewired. So as we found out in the springtime, some of our our global supply chains were pretty fragile. Right? So we basically got a wake-up call. And we learned this through obviously N95 masks, rubber gloves, all the things that happen, ventilators. The economy, the supply lines were not nearly as solid as they needed to be. So what you're going to see is some reshoring, some definitely overall diversifying global supply lines to make sure that they're a little bit more rigid and not so fragile. But nevertheless, China is still going to be, they are and will continue to be a major economic force, as well as Asia, the countries, the emerging market countries in and around China. So from an investment standpoint, we think China is an attractive place to be, as well as some of the emerging countries around China. Next slide. Next slide. Here we go. So here we show just kind of China, what they've done. So the chart here on the left, the red line is their real GDP. Obviously, they were the first to deal with the virus, the pandemic. You can see the economic activity fell off. They are almost back to trend, basically right back to trend. The yellow line there is what the IMF forecast for China way back in October 2019. So they are just about right back on course. And then the chart on the right, we just show China as a share of world GDP or global GDP. Year 2000, they were about 7%. They're projected to be close to 21% in 2025. So basically a tripling of their overall exposure. So just tremendous growth within China. Next slide. Next slide. Here we go. Again, we talked about, we like the emerging market space. And there again, a lot of times investors will talk about emerging markets as just one homogeneous entity. Well, it's clearly not. Here we sort of broke up emerging market countries, those sort of in Asia, whether it's as noted here by South Korea, Taiwan, Philippines, China, versus those maybe in Europe or in Africa or in South America. The Asian emerging market countries are going through, their currencies are holding up much better. What we show there on the x-axis is currency, are their currencies appreciating or depreciating versus the dollar? And then on the y-axis is their kind of the fiscal fiscal budget or the fiscal balance. So the worst case scenario would be Brazil, massive currency depreciation, very poor governmental fiscal balance. So we would be much more inclined to overweight the countries on the right-hand side of this chart that are in the China, Asia region, ex-Japan, and be underweighting the other emerging market countries. And next slide. Next slide. Here we go, last one. Turbocharged transformation. So again, both Dr. Douglas and Dr. Candogan talked about this, but obviously we've experienced this, right? So that we're having this meeting virtually, right? I've been working from home since March. I haven't put a tie on since March. We were joking. I'm not even sure I could put a tie on right now. I'd be curious to see what tie sales in the US have been this year. It have to be relatively close to zero. But we saw it with obviously this work from home. I've done more WebEx calls than I ever thought humanly possible. Telehealth, talk to my doctor virtually. So just significant changes. And I think those are going to be with us. On the flip side, we've seen the devastation to the travel and entertainment and the travel industry in general. Also, the other trend was that has been supercharged here also is sort of the desire to be more climate friendly. So we also think going forward that companies that are much more in tune with the climate, I think are going to do much better in the eyes of investors. But as a result of this, these turbocharged transformation technology in particular, in healthcare, we think are going to be two of the major benefactors, which is why we'd want to overweight those. Go to the next slide. Next slide. Here we go. Here we're just simply showing department store sales as a percent of retail sales going back to 1995 compared to online sales. So go back to 1995, department store sales represented about 15% of overall retail sales. Today it's closer to 3%. Conversely, online sales were about 4% back in 1995. Today they're closer to 25%. And I have joked that I should start a cardboard recycling facility in my garage, given all the boxes that are in my garage. It's unbelievable. FedEx shows up literally every day here. And then last forward, we'll wrap up here, get to the last slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Skipping a bunch here. Next slide. Next slide. There we go. This should be the very last slide. So to sum it all up in summary, as we look forward to 2021, because of the stronger U.S. economic growth, because of the three factors we talked about, massive fiscal stimulus, which is going to be more to come, just tremendously accommodative monetary policy, as well as getting the vaccine rolled out, hopefully successfully. We want to overweight stocks. In the credit market, we talked about we would be willing to invest in lower rated, lower quality bonds, which are higher yielding bonds. On the government bonds, we're neutral, but longer term, we would be pretty significantly underweight U.S. government securities. And why do we say that? Today, if we were to buy a 10-year treasury today, I think the last time I checked, it yielded at 0.88, 0.89, so less than 1%, which is just staggering. It's a really, really unattractive rate. And then cash, we'd be neutral on cash. We would just keep in case we run into some turbulence or things don't go quite as well as planned. You have some dry powder to put back into the market. And then I think there may be one final last slide for those that may want to put one more forward. For those that may want to follow BlackRock on social media, there's some apps there, podcasts, etc., where you can, if you have nothing you want to do and you're terribly bored, you can follow BlackRock on these platforms. With that, I will stop and look forward to questions. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Tom. Another excellent presentation, and thank you for each of the panelists. Okay, for really insightful presentations. We'll get to the Q&A portion of the show now. And what I'll do is ask people to go ahead and either, if you're familiar with if you notice, there's an icon right over my head right here, this thumbs up. I'll ask for people to go ahead and if they have a question, to go ahead and either give me a reaction. Okay. You can also do something like this. Give me a reaction, or if you want to just physically wave, if you're not familiar with the Zoom features, where to find the reactions and so forth, you can just go ahead and wave, and then I'll go ahead and be able to recognize you. So we'll have questions, and again, then questions and answers. We're not delving into discussions between individuals, just a question and an answer. So
Jack, I have a
let's
question.
go ahead. And it looks like, Joel, you were first, okay, with your hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Joel.
Go for it, Joel.
I always have questions, My question is for Chris Douglas. You've seen that President-elect Biden has assembled an economic team already with some familiar names on there. Should we read into any of his selections and what impact they may have on the economy?
I don't think so. I think the real hiccup is trying to get any sort of stimulus package through Congress. Given that the Senate is still up for grabs, it'll be determined by the January 5th special election in Georgia. It seems like the Senate and the House are very far apart for what they want to see in a stimulus package. I think a stimulus package could be passed right now if the House would agree to do something on the order of $900 billion rather than a couple $1 trillion. But it doesn't seem like any side is willing to compromise. And apparently the senators and the Congress people went home for the holidays without doing anything. So I think that's the real hiccup. I think if the House and the Senate could agree, I think either the Trump administration or the Biden administration would be happy to sign it.
If I can add a few, this is the group that helped the economy recover after the global financial crisis. And I think that will inject some confidence because they have dealt with a similar situation in the past. And, with their experiences, this could also be very helpful in dealing with the, economic recovery from the pandemic.
Okay, other questions?
Jack, I've got a question on chat.
Dick Schlick, please.
Yes, my question is this. In the special election in Georgia, if the Democrats win both of those seats, so then the Democrats control Biden and the House of Representatives, what will that do for our economy in the next 12 months in relation to what has been accomplished in the last 4 years under the previous administration?
Tom, do you want to take that one?
Sure, I'll take a stab at that question. I think what it would mean is that we will probably get a much larger fiscal stimulus than we would otherwise. So I would view this as a fire and rain scenario. So I think initially you're going to get much larger stimulus than you would, as I say, under a more divided Congress, which will definitely help the economy. So that's sort of the fire. So adding fuel to the fire. The rain may come later, which will probably be in the form of tax increases and regulatory changes. But I think the economic stimulus is going to be front end loaded.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? You can use your reactions, or you can go ahead and just wave your hands.
Jack, I have a question on chat. Jack.
Nick, God bless you.
First, Ray keeps trying to get in a question for the chat. So take that first, and then I'll jump on.
We're not going to use chats, Nick.
Okay, well then I'll piggyback because this kind of has the same question, but this is more for the economist. If we do get a fiscal stimulus, which looks like it's going to happen to some degree, big or small, whatever it is, other than it's going to create a negative line item for the government balance sheet, what do you guys see as how's it going to affect the long-term economy for the country. And when I say long-term, I'm thinking 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
Okay, well, Nick said he wanted the question go to the economist, and that would be all three of you. But I think you're in the Department of Economics, Chris, so perhaps you could start off, and maybe Yenner could go ahead and finish it off.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. I like Tom's answer in terms of fire and rain. That's a good way to put it. So if there's a stimulus, I think the market's going to react. So suppose the Democrats win both Senate seats. I think that's unlikely, but who knows? This is 2020, right? And you get a $2 trillion stimulus package through both houses of Congress and signed by the president. I think that would just cause a massive market rally. You'd see the equity markets go shooting way up. If the stimulus takes the form of more aid to small businesses, $1,200 to most American households. If it's a $2 trillion stimulus, there'd be big aid to state and local governments too. I think what that does is it keeps a lot of businesses in business who otherwise would have went under because businesses have likely burned through their cash reserves at this point. I think it prevents households from defaulting on their mortgages. If you look at mortgage delinquencies, you haven't really seen that tick up. Certainly not to the degree we saw 10 years ago. Part of that's because there's a foreclosure moratorium, but part of it's because there was such a big stimulus package back in March with the CARES Act, so people could continue paying their mortgages. So I think a stimulus in the short term dumps fuel on the fire on the equity markets. It kind of ties people over until there's a vaccine. Long term, it's a bit dicey. It depends on what you think the consequences are for dumping another $1 trillion or $2 trillion onto the national debt. If you believe modern monetary theory, MMT, doesn't matter. You can increase the national debt as much as you want and nothing bad happens. I suppose in Japan, the debt to GDP ratio is about 250% right now. So maybe there's some wiggle room there. But if you're concerned about the national debt, well, maybe 10 or 15 years down the road, things get kind of ugly with how big the national debt has increased by. So short term, I think a stimulus helps things. Long term, it just depends on what effect a bigger national debt has on things.
Thank you, Chris. Yenner, would you like to?
Yeah, I agree with Chris. Markets are short-sighted when there is, a large fiscal stimulus. They are going to cheer and there's going to be a market rally. But over the long run, we have seen what happened to countries with large debts, and like in Greece and Italy. And we shouldn't really think that it's never going to happen in the US. So we should worry about, large debt, and, we're spending against the future, the money that we don't necessarily have. So where's that going to come from?
Ray, you're up next.
Okay. This question is from Elizabeth Jordan. And hold on just a sec. Now I can't find the question.
Is Elizabeth there? She can go ahead and just ask the question. We're trying not to use the chat format.
Okay. Elizabeth, can you hear me? She says
I can hear you. My internet connection is really terrible right now, so I can't do video. And I can kind of.
We can hear you pretty well,
Okay.
Elizabeth. Go ahead with your question.
You can go ahead.
Thanks. So my question is basically that, as alluded to in the presentation, with the record high unemployment, a lot of people are really suffering right now. And in our own state, we've seen a lot of policy discussions about not wanting to further damage the economy. The pressure about, reopening restaurants and that sort. And so I guess my question is, from a policy perspective, thinking about both the state and federal levels, what kinds of economic policies would be really important right now to both alleviate the real suffering that's going on for a lot of folks and to protect public health?
Well, Chris, that sounds kind of, again, in mainstream economics, or you can always resort to the modern monetary theory.
Well, I do hope that modern monetary theory is true. I don't think it's true. I think you have to worry about the federal deficit and the national debt. But who knows? This is 2020, so maybe it's true. I think the stimulus you need is just direct aid to households and small businesses so they can bridge the gap between now and when things get back to normal. Because the economy will recover more quickly if there are jobs, there are businesses to go back to. There'll be a quicker recovery if a restaurant can just reopen rather than having to wait until a new entrepreneur enters the space to open up a brand new restaurant because the existing one ran out of money and closed. Just as an aside, this is my own personal view, but if there are going to be shutdowns, like shutdowns for restaurants, I'd like to see some evidence that restaurants are responsible for the spread of COVID. It seems like restaurants are being shut down mostly on conjecture, thinking that, well, they must be spreading COVID and cases are going up, so we better shut them down. But I'd like to see some epidemiological evidence for that to be the case. We're doing all this contact tracing. As far as I could tell, there's never been any data presented that suggests that, well, all these cases we're seeing are from people eating at restaurant, despite the restaurants operating at much reduced capacity. These are livelihoods for people, small businesses, restaurants that have been in families for generations. I would like to see the state use a lot more evidence to justify their closure rather than just looking at an overall rise in cases. The only piece of evidence I've seen comes from Minnesota, where apparently only about 1.7% of COVID cases can be traced back to restaurants. And if that's true, I think it's really troubling that we're causing all this economic damage for what appears to be pretty questionable public health benefit.
I could add to this. I don't think that the public health policy is completely divorced from an economic policy. The two of them are related. If we do not really address the public health problem that we have, it will in the long run have economic problems. And in terms of what the federal and state governments can do, I think we could be a little bit more selective in who's getting the help, be more careful when we're spending these trillions of dollars, and maybe, instead of helping every family, some of which may probably did not have any unemployed in their families, maybe just expand unemployment benefit. And also, we shouldn't expect everything from a government, whether they're, state government or federal government. Maybe the businesses could also look at the way they do their businesses and may adapt to this new environment and maybe take advantage of the technology to, even like the restaurants could do better. I have been living in Canada the past year almost, and they had a much stronger public health response. And the restaurants over here, you can just Google a restaurant's name and then shows up. You can click on a few things, you order the food, and you have the credit card on your account. And then some guy comes into our porch over here and drops the food without having any contact. So, we shouldn't really expect everything from the government, but at the same time, the government could also be more selective how this money is spent.
Okay, more questions?
Jack?
Use your reactions, or Michael Witt, you're on the air.
What impact is COVID having on the Social Security Trust Fund? And do we have any data about potential impact on it, on spending over the next 5 years? We've lost a lot of people who draw from that fund. And do we have any hints about whether that's enhancing our ability to provide services for our aging population, including myself, or not? So it just, do we have any data or first hints, early hints?
Well, I'll ask Tom to comment on that. Chris, you're also a public finance fellow, right? Maybe we'll start with Tom and then move over to Chris.
Yeah, I haven't seen anything to that effect. I think irrespective of the pandemic, Social Security, right, depending on what actuarial assumptions you use, there's a day of reckoning out there. Right? It's one of these things where we seem to just kick the can down the road. So yeah, but as relates to what has the pandemic done, I haven't seen any study on that. But your bigger question, Social Security is still a line item out there that needs to be addressed in a much larger fashion.
Chris?
Yeah, every year the Social Security and Medicare trustees release their trust fund report. I don't think the one for 2020 has been released yet. If it has, I haven't seen it. But usually the trust funds get worse during economic downturns. I suspect this won't be any different. The last I knew, the Social Security Trust Fund was projected to go broke, become depleted around 2020 or 2034, 2035, something like that, which sounds like a long ways away. That kind of sounds like Terminator, right? 2035, but it's only 15 years down the road. I suspect it's been sped up. But when the Social Security Trust Fund becomes depleted, it's not like benefits fall to zero. It's just that benefits will fall to less than what's been promised. So I think existing payroll tax revenues, even before COVID at least, could fund about 2/3 of promised benefits. I suggest that that's not the case anymore. It's probably more like 60% of promised benefits, something like that. Although the way things are going, I would suspect that the federal government would just pay what's promised and just tack on the difference to the national debt like everything else. So I don't know what the state of Social Security is right now because the trust fund report hasn't been released yet, but I suspect it's not very good.
Yeah, too bad they don't allow the private investment of the Social Security payments for the younger folks. For us, we kind of like the those cash payments coming into the trust fund. Thank you very much. Let's see, probably have time for a couple more questions. Larry, you have a question? Larry Nichols.
Thank you, Jack. Actually, I have interest in two major stakeholders for me, and one is small business. I do a bit of consulting, and I'm also with a financial institution that focuses on small business. And just as an aside, what we're finding is that despite all the negative statements about the economy, delinquencies and foreclosures, despite even the moratorium, even the approach to foreclosures are at lows that I haven't seen for most of my career. So that's one disconnect. The other comment I would say is that most of the small businesses are pretty nimble. And one of the things that they struggle with is the moving of the goal line, whether it's a shutdown decision or extending it, has been very difficult for them to plan and to move ahead. All that being said, I'd like to move though to my younger population. I believe that every swing, it's like golf, every swing makes somebody happy, and economics is no different. And I'm looking at what's the opportunities that are going to emerge. I think COVID has accelerated much of the changes. We've talked about electronic delivery of education for quite a while and have advanced that, but this is going across all the industries. And so I'd like to put the question out to our panel. What do you see are the coming opportunities, and how our people, or particularly my students, but in general, our small business owners and my students can take advantage of what I see are significant changes?
Why don't we let each member of the panel kind of address that? Yenner, could you
Sure.
start?
I think, I'm very optimistic with regard to small businesses, and what they need to do, from my perspective, which is the global perspective, is to really consider, global markets. The technology allows them the opportunity that was only available to large companies to engage in global trade, and they should be able to take part in that with the extended use of technology. And I'm also very hopeful for the small businesses in the service sector, because what I'm predicting that we're going to see is a large increase in trade and services as a result of use of working from home and using internet to communicate with others. I think some of the services could go to other countries where we can take advantage of the globalization, and we can provide services to people in other countries.
Chris?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the opportunities. I know they're out there. It's just the labor market's still at a pretty tough spot. I'm somewhat skeptical about the future of online education. Maybe it's better for higher education, but it seems like the consensus for K-12 education is that online is not working at the K-12 level. So I suspect that Once things get back to normal, we'll be back in schools in some form. And I think K-12 schools will be largely what they were before COVID. I think anything that can be done remotely will have increased opportunity. So you could think of something that's traditionally being done in person that you could transform into an online environment. There's an opportunity there. Any sort of job, any sort of career that can be done remotely. Things involving the use of data, computer programming that can all be done remotely. So I think there'll be opportunities there. I was reading, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal today or yesterday, that Airbnb has done real well during this summer and the fall throughout COVID. They had a tough go of it earlier this spring. But it turns out people are looking for long-term rentals because work can be done remotely. So they want to leave the city and go somewhere within driving distance, but with fewer people to work remotely there. So I think opportunities related to that will continue to increase too. So I think if anything, what we'll see after COVID is trends we were seeing before COVID kind of accelerate in a lot of respects. I saw a question in the chat pop up about, what do skyscrapers look like after COVID? The answer is I don't really know. This is so unprecedented. I could be totally wrong about trends accelerating and working at home being a thing. Maybe once there's a vaccine, things go back exactly what they were before COVID. That's a possibility. Otherwise, I mean, it's a possibility that you just see empty skyscrapers in major cities as people start working from home and say, well, why should I fight Chicago traffic, for instance, 5 days a week, twice a day, when I could do the job from home? Then it becomes a kind of, I'm digressing a little bit, but then it becomes a question of what happens to the commercial real estate market. If commercial rents plummet and owners of commercial real estate can't pay those loans back, and the banks find themselves with solvency issues, we start to see a replay of the financial crisis last year or 10 years ago with housing, maybe play out in commercial real estate if work from home becomes a thing. That's not really an opportunity, but I think it's a potential issue we might have to deal with on the horizon, even after COVID is behind us.
Excellent. Yeah, I wish I had a crystal ball to be able to answer this question more precisely, but I tend to agree with Dr. Condogan that services will be huge. We talked about technology and healthcare. Healthcare, simply from the standpoint of the aging of the baby boomers. Healthcare industry is massively short workers. The other thing that I experienced with our clients, there is also I think a massive shortage in the U.S. of skilled workers. So there are many employers cannot find electricians, you can't find, even auto mechanics, you can't find die makers. So it's the skilled trades is an area that the U.S. it's amazing where we sort of have shifted over to the services side of the economy. So yeah, there's definitely opportunities. I would say as it relates to small business, we have to maintain our ability to encourage folks to take the risk to open a business, because that is the lifeblood of our system. Sometimes I think politicians don't understand that, but when people risk everything they have, go in debt, take home equity lines of credit out, max out their credit cards to start a business, that is America. And that has to, we have to figure out a way to make sure that people in the U.S. are willing to take risks, and then more importantly, can be rewarded for taking those risks. That's the real heart of our the heart of our economy.
Okay, thank you, Tom. I think we have enough time for one more quick question. If you could either raise your hand or Trevor, I see your
Awesome.
Your reaction.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I guess my question, it comes at a time where a lot of people are saying, if we just close these businesses down for this amount of time, this all will go away. So my question is another nationwide shutdown feasible? And if it is instituted, what would be the consequences? And by nationwide shutdown, I mean, I guess, quote unquote, non-essential businesses being closed temporarily.
Like Chris, I think you can answer this quickly because I think you've alluded to it.
Yeah, I think a second shutdown would be catastrophic. We got through the first shutdown using very aggressive fiscal and monetary policy. It looks like monetary policy is going to be aggressive still. I worry about inflation because of that. But it doesn't seem like there's an appetite for a second aggressive stimulus package like we saw earlier this spring. So if there was a second widespread shutdown, but no aggressive stimulus package to bridge the gap, I think a lot of businesses would permanently fail, because at this point they've burned through all the cash reserves. And when there's a shutdown, some costs disappear. If you're a restaurant and you shut down, sure, you're not paying labor costs, but you still have to pay costs like rent on the building or a mortgage payment on the building. Well, if there's a second shutdown, a lot of businesses just won't be able to pay those fixed costs and would fail. So I think if there was a second shutdown, there's a good chance you would see rising mortgage delinquencies. You start to see commercial property defaults, which means that banks who loaned money for people to buy those buildings wouldn't get repaid, which would be a banking crisis like we saw 10 years ago, maybe even worse, because it would be a housing crisis plus a commercial property crisis, where we didn't really see a commercial property crisis 10 years ago. So I think there would be a good chance that we would see a recession like we saw this summer, with a financial crisis thrown in on top of that, which would just make the situation just substantially worse. So I really think a second shutdown would be catastrophic. And maybe I'm a little bit of a contrarian, but I'm not convinced the first shutdown really did anything to reduce the number of infections. If anything, it seems like it just pushed those infections farther in the future. And, you know, we can't just keep the economy shut down forever until the vaccine is completely distributed. So I just don't think a second shutdown is feasible.
Okay, thank you, Chris. I think that's the allotted amount of time that we have for the Q&A, and I'll very shortly pass it over to President Ray. But I want to thank the panelists personally for excellent presentations. I'd also like to go ahead and thank Andy Vanderput for her help putting this together. Also, thanks Scott Johnson and the School of Management and the Dean's Office, especially Kristen Arntz, for her usual excellence in helping make this work. I'd also like to thank the food service staff in advance for next year, and we'll have the usual lasagna and cannolis at the end. I'll pass this over to President Ray. And President Ray and perhaps ex-President George, is it possible to keep once we close the meeting, is it possible to allow people to kind of mingle for a few minutes afterwards?
Yes, it is.
Great. Okay. Thank you, President Ray.
You're welcome. George, can I get that?
Yeah.
That screen. Okay, I need to move. First of all, I want to thank Kyle for his inspirational message. And Flint Rotary thanks each and every one of you for joining us today. I just want to mention that I want to echo what Jack said when he thanked everybody for this tremendous presentation. It has been recorded, and you can pick it up on YouTube, Rotary Club of Flint, anytime you want to do an update or a review of it. I hope you enjoyed our program as much as we enjoyed welcoming you as members and guests. Be safe, stay warm, and look to open opportunities in order to provide service above self. Have a great weekend, and we are adjourned. And oh, there we go. There's a good one. And we can say here.
Thank you, Ray.
Right. Great job, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Usually this is where the some audience members kind of walk up to the podium and ask questions and predictions and things of that nature. But please feel free to engage in some questions. And also amongst yourselves, I see a lot of alumni here. And I see Fawn here. But, so anyway, please enjoy the moment. Bob, what's up?
Well, I just was intrigued, and I hope I haven't lost him here. And I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it, Yerner. You mentioned Greece. I'm thinking of the national debt. which is always on my mind. And I wonder when, in fact, it becomes such a burden we collapse. And Greece has gone through that. And I don't know if the International Money Foundation saved it and what happened, but do you know if there is a study that compares to what happened in Greece and why it happened and our own country or anything like that that we could read that would be either encouraging or discouraging?
Well, Greece's situation was a little bit different because they are part of the Eurozone. They don't have their own currency. And that actually made things a lot worse. When a crisis hits the US, one of the things that we could do is to devalue the value of the US dollar, and that could help us a little bit. But Greece did not have that option. And so all they had to do was to ask for help from other countries. And since they had already debt, they couldn't borrow anymore. And basically, the biggest help to them came from the European Union, especially the Eurozone countries, because they do share the same currency. And Greece's troubles started affecting all of the Eurozone. So they had to put money together and help them out.
Okay.
They were on a good track in recovery, but this thing hit again. So they're really cursed in a way.
Yeah. Well, it's a debt also, Yenner and Bob. It's also the debt, but also other social payments that were, including Social Security, which some people have been asking questions about. So it really resulted in a lot of civil unrest. I mean, people were taking the streets over the economics, but again, eventually they resolved it. I always like to say, don't go ahead and owe money to Germany. They put a lot of pressure on Greece to pay up.
Yeah.
But it sounds like we can print enough money anytime we want, but it becomes worthless after some point in time.
Well, the nice thing about the US is US dollar is used a lot in international trade and investment. So there's constant demand for US dollar. And I think that, helps the US in a way to keep its currency more valuable than it should be. And it becomes overvalued. And I think that, when we're printing money, in a way, we're printing gold because there's demand from other countries for the currency.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else?
Yeah. Go ahead, Garrett.
All right. So it's kind of unfortunate. I wish I could have got this out a little bit sooner. But given the conditions of this pandemic, I'm kind of wondering about the future of automation within industry and taking over low-skill jobs. We've talked a lot about the number of jobs and the possibility of them coming back, but I feel like there's a significantly larger incentive to kind of switch over to an automated schedule for many companies. I guess, what do you guys think about that as people who are kind of sitting a little bit higher up in industry and in a position to make these decisions? Because a lot of these machines, a lot of these, I guess, kiosks, stuff like that, they're a lot more reliable than many people who have either quit their job due to the pandemic, they don't show up. There's just a potential significant shift in culture, and it is the 21st century. We are innovating. Is automation the future?
Any good question.
I would definitely agree. So what you're going to see as part of these global supply chains that we talked about, right? There's a reason why companies move their manufacturing over to whether to Mexico or to China was for cost. Well, if you're going to have to reshore that or bring it back to the U.S., one way you can do it is through automation, through robotics. So produce the same amount of goods with far fewer people. So I think you are spot on. Something that's going to be a massive growth industry within the U.S. Absolutely.
So kind of not only that, but we've also had a hike in many states in the minimum wage after this past election. So I think that might be a driver for that industry as well.
So.
Okay, well, I see a lot of alums here. I see Michael Engel, Mark Hopkins, a variety of recent grads within the last 4 or 5 years. Most of them are driving expensive sport cars, I'm sure. But perhaps President Ray, I think we might have reached our limit, and you know, I know a lot of people need to go ahead and get back to work. So,
all right, no more questions then. Okay, well,
all right, thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.